The rookie receivers in the 2024 draft class might already be more valuable than you think. We will dive in on this episode of Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. It's a Wednesday, which means it's Matt Williamson Wednesday. Follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. And of course, follow Kate Madjuk on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. We've got Matt in Indianapolis for the NFL Scouting Combine. So we're going to touch on some Combine stuff at the end of the show. But we got a really good question here from John. He wants to know about Malik Nabers, whose ADP right now is pretty high, wide receiver 11. Matt, how do you generally value elite prospects like this before we even get to the Combine, before we get to free agency, and of course the draft?
So I remember like when Saquon Barkley came out, it was a lot like Bijan, to be honest with you. Transcendent player. Boy, he's going early. Not only is he like the first pick in rookie drafts, but boy, he's valued over most of the running backs already in the league. And I remember at that point, there was a lot of blowback. You can't do that. Don't put the cart before the horse on these rookies. Who knows where they're going to land? They might not be any good. Hogwash. I just want them all. I mean, I want them with all the years in front of them. I almost don't care where they land. Wide receiver landing spot does matter, obviously, but I think less than some positions, to be honest with you, just because, okay, they go to a bad situation without a great quarterback or offensive scheme. Well, the next year they'll probably all get fired and there'll be a new offensive scheme. Half the league is changed play callers basically 2 years in a row. So if you're stuck in a tough situation, you'll probably get out of it or at least change your tunes. So I think the price of especially these wide receivers in this particular draft, which are exceptional, are only increasing assets right now.
Kate?
I think that's a very fair assessment. And I think we actually talked about this on a mailbag episode, maybe a couple of weeks ago here about, how we value these rookies before we really know anything. And wide receiver was that one position that I think we were all in staunch agreement wins out. Talent wins out at wide receiver. Running backs, I'm a bit more hesitant to rank aggressively than wide receivers. Before we know landing spot, before we have all of this extra information that's going to come in the next 2 months, that I'm a lot more hesitant with running backs because they can be so situationally dependent. You really just, you don't know until you get to the draft. You can, you can do your prospect evaluations, and sometimes talent doesn't always trump everything else at the running back realm.
Matt, I want to ask you about Malik Nabers specifically, because that was who the question was about. Nabers, wide receiver 11. I think it's fascinating. We're starting to see more and more draft analysts out there put Nabers ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., or at least like 1A, 1B. How close is Nabers for you when it comes to Marvin Harrison versus Nabers?
I think that's a little bonkers because Harrison is so rare, and he's not going to work out here. But if he would, I did some homework on him. He's atop of the freaks list. I mean, his workout numbers are insane. That's not a knock at all on Nabers. I just think Harrison is that rare that we just haven't seen something from him in a while. And I do think some of these draft nicks, these draft analysts want to make a splash. And so their name is mentioned on social media. He has him over Harrison. Wow. But Harrison, to me, is probably the best wide receiver prospect since Calvin Johnson. I mean, ahead of Jamar Chase, ahead of anyone that's gone in the top 5. So he's truly rare. But Nabers, is close to Jamar Chase, in my opinion, in terms of prospects. I think he's got a little bit I think he needs to prove that he can beat press man coverage at the NFL level and not just get schemed up. But he is so dynamic and so twitchy and great with the ball in his hands and all those things. I think 9 out of 10 years, he's a wide receiver 1 in the NFL draft for our purposes. So I think I want him, just looking at, wide receiver ranks from around the league or from around the Dynasty community, I would have Harrison in front of him, and I think I'd have 7 veterans in front of him. So if he's wide receiver 11,
you're buying.
I'm buying all day long. Yep, without hesitation.
Just to be clear, there are a couple really well-respected draft analysts that have Nabers ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, you're right, though, Matt. There are some people out there just trying to make a name for themselves. But say, hey, I got this guy ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm going to be right. But like our friend Lance Zierlein has Malik Nabers as his highest graded player in the class. And I think that just goes to speak on what you've said. Like in most drafts, Malik Nabers is the number 1 receiver, and he's probably a top 5 pick. He might not be a top 5 pick in this class because of how ridiculous it is. But Kate, I want to go back to receivers with you. How willing are you to take a 21, 22-year-old receiver over somebody like Tyreek Hill, who we know is every year has a chance to finish as the wide receiver 1? Are you willing to take a shot of the younger guy, or do you want to ride it out with someone like Tyreek Hill?
It definitely is all dependent for me on where you're at in your dynasty journey. Obviously, if you're a contender right away, that does give a player like Tyreek Hill or even like a Christian McCaffrey, who, not necessarily declining massively in value, but he's somebody that realistically he's going to hit the age cliff at some point. All of these sort of aging veterans are definitely kind of dependent on, how close are you truly to contending? And now, Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr., these might actually be guys that, depending on their landing spot and how they come out, they actually might contribute to your championship run here right off the bat. So, non-specific to those 2 rookies, generally speaking, it's all going to be based on where the rest of my roster is at before I decide whether I'm going to take that upside of the young rookie versus the proven vet.
So we got some news during the first day of the NFL Combine about a certain receiver with the Cincinnati Bengal. I want to ask you guys, what should we hope happens here with Tee Higgins in the Bengals over the next couple of weeks? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. I love betting on the futures market. Go bet right now with some of the live same-game parlays. There's no football on. You might as well bet some NBA games while you're just sitting at home. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Maybe read that book that you've been wanting to catch up on? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule, like reading a book or going for that extra walk, is figuring out what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can go do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers, just want to let you know that on tomorrow's show, we're going to be breaking down the AFC West, so tune in for that. We also want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Matt, I want to ask you about Tee Higgins, who was just franchise tagged by the Bengals. We got a question here from Steve. What should I want to happen to Tee Higgins since I own him in every single Dynasty league?
Okay, I think you're very happy he got franchised. Now, they could still entertain offers. Could Carolina, make a trade offer that blows their doors off? I suppose. But I thought if he hits the open market, this guy's going to be a Panther. They have a lot of money. They're actively, they're very active organization overall. They're aggressive. I think Cincinnati's a great spot for him. And there's a couple things to unpeel here. My worry, and I think this was the first show the three of us have ever done together, was, Marcus, you mentioned one of your dynasty assets you were most worried about was Joe Burrow. Mm-hmm. And that stuck with me, and I've been thinking about that a lot, that this guy has missed so much time when you consider training camps and as well. All the
never taken a preseason snap ever.
Right, ever. I mean, and even as a rookie and as a young guy, before he was proven. So that's the only part that worries me. But I also think something I believed for a very long time is there absolutely are not 32 number one wide receivers in the NFL. There's truthfully probably 12 or 15. I don't think there's even 20. And with all respect to Higgins, I don't think he's one of them. I think he's a wide receiver 2 in the NFL. I think he's a wide receiver 2 in Dynasty. I think he's a wide receiver 2 in redraft. And it's just very comfortable where he is. And I don't want to see him thrown into a new role in a new town, in a new organization with a new quarterback and expected to catch 115 balls, because I think the chances of it being a success story are less than it being a failure.
Okay.
Tee Higgins is a really interesting one, because I've said before that, conversely, Matt, I know you said, you don't think he's a wide receiver 1, but that doesn't mean that he wouldn't be the best wide receiver on the field for at least half the teams in the league. Does that make him like a monstrous alpha? No. Are there flaws to his game? Yes. He hasn't been the best separator, but you know what? He has the size and play strength to make up for the fact that he's not necessarily going to blow you away in terms of separation. There's a lot that you look at Tee Higgins and think, boy, if he had the opportunity to lead a team in targets, which I don't think anybody's denying the fact that if Jamar Chase is healthy and on the football field, he is going to be the primary target for Joe Burrow. There's just going to be this part in me that wonders, what could he do as the prime guy? Because I do think that he's got a very dominant play style. And I think in the right situation, which you mentioned, you teased it a little bit, the idea of him going to a team like the Panthers, obviously not that suitable. But man, suddenly you put him in an offense like the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, who have their own issues. We'd be having a very different conversation. Right. I think, he could be a game changer for an offense. And for example, I think, even if he went to the Panthers, I think he's the type of wide receiver that could elevate Bryce Young and his game. And again, maybe mask some of those flaws with his play strength. But if I'm like a Tee Higgins manager, I feel like I want him to go elsewhere. And I know the unknown is scary. The unknown is no guarantee for anything, but I have to imagine that there's upside elsewhere.
All right. Well,
you might get your sorry, I want to throw one thing in. You might get your wish, Kate, though, a year from now. I mean, a franchise tag isn't a 3-year contract. It's it's not. He could have a healthy season, almost duplicate Chase's numbers, or heaven forbid Chase gets hurt. He shows he's a number one. His stock could still rise. I would be shocked in this next year, though, assuming he's franchised and doesn't leave Cincinnati, that his stock drops.
Very fair.
I just want to mention Duke Tobin, the Bengals GM, spoke at the NFL Combine today, and his tone talking about Tee Higgins was very different than at this time last year, because basically last year we're not in the business of losing good players. That was what he said in regards to a contract extension with Tee Higgins. Obviously, that didn't get done. He was asked today about the potential of trading Tee Higgins now that they franchise tagged him, and it was basically I'm summaring this up. It's, hey, if the right offer comes in, we would consider it. That's interesting to me, because now it seems like, hey, if somebody's willing to give us a first-round pick, or maybe it's a combination of a second-round pick and something else, the Bengals would be open to it. My thing is, if it's not the Panthers, which that's the one landing spot that we've all kind of talked about, Matt, is there another, and it's not the Chiefs, is there another team or two that would actually help raise his value?
Raise, I have a hard time with. I mean, I think Carolina is an obvious one because he's definitely going to lead the team in targets. I'm thinking of teams that have a lot of cap space. Could Houston get really aggressive and throw him in the mix with their two guys? Could the Bears put him opposite DJ Moore for their first overall quarterback because there wasn't a receiver at 9 that was suitable? I'm sure we could come up with several other examples.
Well, Matt, I'm looking at some teams that have like multiple second-round picks. I'll give you how about the Washington Commanders?
Maybe, but I just think they have bigger fish to fry than wide receiver. I mean, that's one of the only positions I kind of like on their team.
They spent a lot of assets.
Yeah,
the New York Giants.
I don't know if that's an upgrade for Higgins. I thought about the Giants. I mean, that'd be okay. I mean, I wouldn't hate it. But real quick, before we go through the rest of the teams, I think it is something we have to note that Tyler Boyd's also a free agent. They have 0 tight ends under contract at the moment.
0.
So they kind of need Higgins. You know what I mean? Like, who's catching the ball here besides Chase?
The one thing, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, one of the reasons why I'm still a little bit hesitant to think that the Bengals are going to give him a long-term deal and maybe are doing this just to hold the asset for a while.
Buy a season.
Is they just don't have any speed on offense, and bringing back Tee Higgins doesn't make you any faster. I wonder if they're looking at potentially cashing in that chip in a really good wide receiver class to potentially add somebody that can give them a little bit more dynamism in their offense. I don't know.
I wouldn't fight you on that. I would understand the logic without question. A real field stretcher, Chase be the alpha, the other guy be the Deshaun Jackson type.
Kate, I've got one question for you before we move on. The Green Bay Packers have 2 second-round picks. They've got a really good young quarterback. They've got some cap space. You like it?
Would love the move for Jordan Love, but I'm going to be honest, Marcus. I don't know that they need a Tee Higgins. And I like that might be a pretty bold take, but I have to imagine that they're coming out of Jordan Love's first season under center, looking at what their very, very young and inexperienced group of skill position players did in that offense year one. I mean, you had it really didn't matter, who was being targeted at that point by Jordan Love. Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Tucker Kraft. Like, there were about 50 options on that field, and each of them was almost as efficient as the next. And so, like, yeah, would I love that for Jordan Love?
Be really fun.
But if I'm, sitting there in the front office here, I'm probably looking at my cast, and like, obviously you can make some improvements, and Tee Higgins would be an improvement, but I might actually sit pretty on this group of weapons they had, because I do think that they proved a lot in year one.
All right. Matt is at the NFL Combine. Let's talk about how to use the Combine when it comes to evaluating this upcoming rookie class. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Matt, you're in Indianapolis, so of course we've got to talk a little bit about the NFL Combine. First of all, how are the vibes in the Combine? Any good scoops that you can kind of offer us here to the exclusive listeners of Locked On Dynasty?
I haven't even been here 24 hours, and I've done I've done 4 hours of radio, and we had Daniel Jeremiah sit down with us today. That was a blast. We've had a lot of really good guests. Daniel stood out. But I can't say I've got great scoop or buzz yet.
You're working on it though. That's what you just said.
The bars tonight will help. I mean, there's no question about that. The night is still young. There's no doubt about that. It's one of my favorite weeks of the year without question. And you get a lot of the same people, or a lot of the right people all in the same couple buildings, a couple square blocks. A lot of stuff will pop out throughout the course of the week. We had some people talking, but I wish I had more scoop for you. I mean, I don't, it's not really my specialty either. I'm not really I'm not an insider that way.
So Matt, how do you use the Combine when it comes to evaluating these prospects?
If it's NFL or fantasy or anything, I think we can't lose sight of why the Combine was created. It's in Indianapolis because a very, very high percentage of the teams can drive here, and it's a conventions town. So it's a perfect city for it, but it was created for medical reasons. I mean, that is the number one thing that comes out of the Combine, despite all of us goofs on Radio Row and everybody reporting all the scuttlebutt and people at the podiums. So if you can get any kind of medical information, that's gold. Unfortunately, for 99% of our listeners, including probably the three of us, you find that out on draft day when your favorite player falls to the fifth round instead of the second. It's hard to find medical issues, but anything you can, you have to take very, very seriously, in my opinion. But almost on a position breakdown for our services here as dynasty managers, some of it I think you can use against your opponent when a wide receiver or running back runs a phenomenal 40 and people get too excited about those players. If you happen to have an early draft and own them, or a spot where everyone's trading up to get said player, that usually doesn't translate to great fantasy success. Running backs and wide receiver 40 times aren't super important in my opinion. And there's a lot of data to pack that up. I don't think you gain a ton from quarterback drills either, for fantasy points. Of course, athletic guys are going to run more, but you should know if they're good runners before they got to Indy. But tight ends, I want talent. I want 3-cone drills. I want change of direction. I want burst. I want jumps. I mean, I want high upside tight ends that have an awful lot of athletic ability. Even if they're super raw players, they may sit for a year. That's fine. But tight ends to me are very important in terms of testers.
Kate, what about you?
Yeah, my overall approach, and don't get me wrong, I love the Combine. I think it is a source of entertainment. And there's a reason that the NFL has made the spectacle of the NFL Combine that it is. That being said, Matt, I think you hit it on the head with the fact that you can sometimes use the data that comes out here to your advantage. That's why I think it's kind of important to kind of have your pre-Combine evaluations for players, because I do think that sometimes that data can skew the view of a player, whether that's positively or negatively. And sometimes we put way too much weight on it, way too much. And certain things like the change of direction drills, you like to see strong results there, but also if there's a bad result, I hate to say that you almost want to use the Combine to kind of confirm what you've seen on the tape, but I also think that that's the way that I use the Combine. And confirming or denying my confirmation biases.
Kate, I'll say, I mean, there's a couple guys in this class that I really like. I know they're great football players, so I don't really care about the 40. I'm actually kind of hoping they run slower than what people anticipate. Because I'll give you an example. My guy, Malachi Corley from Western Kentucky, I love him. I kind of hope he runs in the 4.5s. It's not going to change my opinion on him. But if he runs a 4.39, I can guarantee you that he's going to be a lot more expensive next week than he is today. That's a bad way to probably use the combine, but it's something that you do need to realize that sometimes a average to poor number can affect a value, and maybe it really shouldn't.
And for example, like I actually keep going back to Anthony Richardson, who we talked about on yesterday's show. Anthony Richardson, obviously a guy that came out, literally broke the combine. Like there was no quarterback that ever tested in the way that Anthony Richardson tested. And I'm going to be honest, like sometimes you see the data, and I'm not at all knocking Anthony Richardson, his athleticism or anything. But when you see the testing and then you see the real life game speed, it didn't always correlate for me. And I think that's sort of like one of my biggest, lesson points is any over exaggerated result. Generally, you need to be tempering your reaction to it. If your gut gets excited about any sort of testing numbers or anything, probably should ignore it because you just get too excited.
Matt, any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thoughts are, a receiver is a burner. I mean, it's Ted Ginn. I mean, one of these guys is known for speed. And you watch his tape and you're like, wow, he's really fast. And then he comes to Indianapolis and he runs a 4.28. Don't give him credit twice. You already knew he was fast. I mean, he doesn't get double credit for that. And scouts, everybody makes those mistakes. I mentioned it with tight ends, but I meant to lump in receivers. Smith and Jigba is a really good example of this. The 3-cone to me is important because the 3-cone is more like route running. Separation's gained by not losing speed coming out of your breaks, not how fast you can run 40 yards down the field. So I do pay attention to 3-cone for route running positions.
I think it was our good friend Josh Norris who kind of coined the phrase "don't count it twice" when it comes to some of these guys, like Xavier Worthy from Texas. We know he's really fast. When he runs a 4.31, don't boost him up your boards because that's what he's supposed to do, is run fast. I think that's something that's very, very important and something that's critical to remember as you're watching all of these players work out this weekend. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Follow Kate at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.